Hi everyone, welcome to episode 65 of the XS Noize Podcast. I'm Mark Millar. Thanks for listening. In this episode, I talk to White Lies bassist and songwriter Charles Cave about the band's new album, As I Try Not to Fall Apart. If you missed last week's episode, I spoke to Liverpool singer-songwriter Jamie Webster about his fantastic new album, Moments. So check it out, and if you like the podcast, it would be amazing if you can subscribe and share it with your friends. If you want up-to-date music news, album reviews and interviews, then check out our main website at xsnoize.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Search for the tag at XS Noize Music. Here's XS Noize writer Daniel Lynch with a taste of what's been on the website this week.
In the reviews section this week, Ashley Critter gives the new Frank Turner album a perfect score, saying FTCH captures the artist in pure, unadulterated form. On his 9th album, Turner returns to his aggressive punk roots, but keeps all of the open and honest writing fans have become used to. A Wave Across a Bay is the standout track. Alex Hoggard has had a listen to the latest album from Andy Bell. Flickr gets 8 out of 10. Alex says Flickr's 18 tracks manage to cover a vast array of musical styles, but still form a cohesive, flowing album. Finally, after winning Group of the Year at the Brit Awards, Wolf Alice have announced new Irish dates for later this year. They've moved 2 Dublin shows to August and added a Belfast gig on September 1st. Find the full ticket details and a review of their latest album Blue Weekend at xsnoize.com.
White Lies are an English post-punk band from Ealing, London, featuring Harry McPhee, Jack Lawrence Brown and Charles Cave. The band released their 6th album, As I Try Not to Fall Apart, on Friday, February 18th, 2022. I caught up with White Lies songwriter and bassist Charles Cave to talk about the album, songwriting, the band's upcoming tour and much more. So sit back, relax and enjoy the XS Noize Podcast with Charles Cave from White Lies. So hi Charles, welcome to the XS Noize Podcast.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So just going back to the start, how did the band get together? How did you meet? Because I know at the start you were originally called Fear of Flying. You released 2 singles produced by Stephen Street. But just prior to that, how did you guys meet?
I mean, it was basically just sort of school friendships. I didn't actually end up going to the same secondary school as Jack and Harry did, but we were kind of friends through other friends, through the kind of geography. We all grew up in like West London, and I don't know, it's kind of small around there. Like people just connect quite easily. And I had gone to primary school with Jack, so there was that was already there. Pretty much at one point, I remember, because my parents and Jack's parents were always good friends, and I just remember my dad saying one day, like, "Oh, I hear Jack got a drum kit for Christmas or something," and Harry and I were already kind of friends at that point, and I was just like, "Oh, do you know a guy called Jack in your year at school?" He was like, "Yeah," and I was like, "Oh, he's got a drum kit. Maybe we should try playing music with him," because he's like the only drummer we knew, and his parents were pretty relaxed about letting us play in his bedroom at the weekend. So pretty much started off like that. What was kind of interesting though with us three is, unlike I guess other bands that we had sort of played with as really young teenagers, as you do, like we didn't really ever do any covers. I don't think we pretty much just like went straight in to just kind of playing, and I suppose for want of a better term, jamming. And we just put a lot of work in. Like it did become, we had no real like aspirations to be honest, other than like, you know, hoping to get like invited to play at someone's house party, or there were occasionally sort of like battle of the band style events happening at local like schools or churches or whatever. It was the kind of gigs that we had to get back then were like, yeah, we did we used to play at this like youth club that was run by a church. None of us are religious at all, but it was run by a church, and it kind of got to the point where in order to like even play, you sort of had to kind of pretend to be a little bit interested in the religious side of things. So you have to kind of like show up and do like a prayer meeting first or something like that. It's a bit ridiculous. Anyway, so we pretty much just took it really seriously from the get-go in terms of just wanting to be good at playing. As we moved through the last, I guess, couple of years of secondary school, we changed. You know, we at one point started calling ourselves Fear of Flying, and then we would play. The thing is back then there were so many gigs you could play as even like quite a really, really new indie band in London. There were so many like indie club nights and stuff, because that was, I'm not saying that like the super nightclubs and stuff weren't around, because of course they were, but like indie clubs was a really like, you know, as a popular thing to do for kind of anyone, because indie music was pop music back then. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, a lot of the bands, the Killers, the Strokes, whatever, that was on pretty mainstream radio. So we played all the time, like all these different club nights and stuff all over London. We were, you know, and then it got even a bit more serious. We got offered a couple of tours with Jamie T and then with the Maccabees. And we were basically having to like finish a school day, having brought our equipment to our different schools. And then we would meet at like Victoria coach station and get on a coach to go to like Exeter or something. And we'd just make it in time to go on stage and play, and then get an overnight coach back to London to go to school the next day. So it was pretty hardcore. And we left school and we kind of continued on for a bit. And yeah, as you said, we released a couple of singles through a label called Young and Lost Club. And then basically after a couple of years of this, we were feeling the heat that maybe we should just kind of go to university like everyone else was doing. But there just came this time where Harry and I decided to write some music at his parents' house. And they had like just a really simple kind of electric piano keyboard. And having always written kind of as a band before, like in a room, in a rehearsal room, we basically sat down, and like 15 minutes later had written our song Unfinished Business. And we were kind of like, oh, that was good. That worked well. Like, you know, whatever. And we managed to get some demo time with Stephen Street's engineer, a guy called Tom. And we demoed that. And to be perfectly honest with you, pretty much since putting that demo of Unfinished Business on, back then it was MySpace, we pretty much just haven't stopped since. Like, it just kind of snowballed from there in every which way. Like, you know, pretty soon after we had a manager, and then we're talking to record labels, and we were demoing more. And then the second song we put on that MySpace page was a demo of Death. So we kind of set ourselves up pretty well. Like, we put two very, very strong songs out, one after the other. And the kind of industry hype sort of ensued. But luckily, like, I think because we put so many years in before, we would always just prioritize the music. Like, that's all we ever wanted to be, is just kind of good at writing songs, good at playing. So I think because of that, when it did start to go well, it didn't kind of like smack us around the head or anything. We kind of actually felt like, all right, yeah, this is kind of what they tell you that happens in life. Like, you work hard for a while and then it turns good. So I think it kept us very grounded.
Can you remember your first gig as White Lies?
Yeah, well, so that's kind of funny, because we had this gig scheduled, like the first official White Lies gig, which is going to be at this little venue in East London called Hoxton Bar and Grill. And we knew that there would be a lot of, like, you know, record labels and publishing labels and stuff coming to that. It was going to be intense. So our manager came up with the idea of doing a few warm-up shows, but we just do it under a different name. So we could just basically play a few gigs in front of people, but not risk, you know, being White Lies and having industry people come and drive down to see that. So we called ourselves Beethoven, spelt very incorrectly. I can't remember exactly how it was spelled, but it wasn't spelt like his name. And I think we did two shows. I think we did one in Brighton and one in Wales, I want to say. And they were like at just tiny little indie nights or something in front of like 15 people. So that was good that we did that. But yeah, I can remember the first show. Hoxton's one of those venues where there's no backstage at all, so you have to just walk through the crowd to get onto the stage. And it's small, you know, it's a tiny venue, and it was absolutely packed in there. So beforehand, we were just sat in like a restaurant just down the road, like not eating anything, not drinking anything, just kind of sat there like nervous, and then just had to walk through the front of the venue, push through the crowd, go on stage, and just play like six. I think we played like 6 songs. I think that's all we had back then. We were technically supporting, there were 2 other bands playing after us. So it was, you know, it wasn't like we're, you know, trying to headline or anything. But it went really well. It was amazing. I remember us all, it finished and people were super into it, and we'd rehearsed for so long, so like we played well. There were no serious like mess ups, and we had very like minimal lighting. We just had a kind of like theater style white lighting and a couple of like Parkan lights, all wearing black shirts. And it was an amazing day. Like, it was an amazing evening, and it kicked off so much, everything that came after it.
Yeah, and you released your debut album, "To Lose My Life," which hit number 1 on the UK album chart. It's a fantastic album. It must have felt amazing. Your first album hitting number 1. What was it like?
It was really surreal. Yeah, that was, and I don't know even if I've ever really quite got my head around it. I think, at the time that we found out that the album had gone to number 1, we were in like Siberia, filming the video for Farewell to the Fairground. So we got this kind of broken phone call from our manager. We were aware that we were like in the running, it could happen. So it wasn't like a total surprise, but I think we're all kind of like realists bordering on pessimists. And we were kind of like, guys, it's just, if we get top 5, that's just amazing, like whatever. And he called us and said, it's number 1. And I think, to be honest, we were like, we stood outside in the freezing, it was like -20 in the freezing cold. We just had like a shot of vodka and then carried on with doing the video. And I remember a friend of mine, a much older friend, I think he's in his 60s now, but when I got back to London, I saw him and he was just kind of like, so what? Like, are you like a millionaire now or something? And I was like, no, that's not how it works. You don't get a number 1 record and someone hands you £1 million. Like, definitely, it's not how it works. Yeah, it was amazing, and of course, it just basically was just this amazing extra fuel that just propelled us immediately, especially around Europe. We put so much time in mainland Europe in those first. I mean, we still do, and that's why we're there most of the time. But in those first few years, where a lot of UK bands would almost certainly just spend all their time up and down the UK, we were straight to like Belgium and Germany and the Netherlands and Denmark, playing in front of 100 people or whatever, or less, maybe even some evenings. But it was a great time, and it was also a time we were signed to Universal Records or to Fiction, and all the teams around Europe and stuff were like so passionate and proactive. It was still a time when like bands were very much a real thing, a real mainstream thing. Everyone really cared. There was no, like, social media was such a kind of tiny thing at that point. So nothing revolved around it. It was about us showing up and doing old school interviews with magazines and newspapers and going into radio stations and all of that. Like, it was, we worked so hard. And I think it was Jack a few months ago. He said he discovered one of our old like tour itineraries from, I think, maybe like 2009, 2010. And he's like, oh, I don't know why I found it. I just did. And I was just looking at it, and he was like, it blew me away, like how hard we worked back then. It would be, just days and days in a row without a day off, where we'd have a show every night, possibly a flight at 6 a.m. in the morning somewhere, immediately driven to a radio station to do a session or an interview, and then interviews all afternoon in the venue, then play a show, and some of these, and then we'd just like fly to Japan and then do one show there, and then immediately fly to Argentina. And it was like, it was we couldn't do it now. We're far too old for that kind of level of work now. But it was great. We are where we are because we put a ton of work in. The people working around us put a ton of work in, and it was just really, really good times, basically.
Well, from your first album to the 6th and latest, White Lies release, As I Try Not to Fall Apart, in February, it's your most musical varied album to date. It's got rock, electro pop, prog, funk, but it still has the big trademark White Lies choruses. I thought your last album, 5, was hard to beat, but you've definitely outdone it this time with this one. It's a phenomenal record. I've been really enjoying it.
I was so glad to hear, and you're absolutely right. Like, the overriding feeling that we all had, I think, going into this was like, we did really well with the last one. We were very proud of it, and of course, you go into every new album, thinking like, this one has got to be good. But you also, when you get to album 6, you know, you also are like realistic, and you're like, the probability of each one being better than the last is like not that high, like, you know. But we were up against it, and it took a very, very, very long time to make this one, partly because of the pandemic, of course, but also it just needed more work. It just needed a lot of time. You're absolutely right about the kind of, it is the most musically varied. I think part of that is because for the first time ever, I was writing songs alone for it. Harry was writing songs alone for it. And that's always going to produce different results to when we had traditionally just sort of met up in his bedroom and written together. I think, you know, truthfully, I found that process most of the time more enjoyable than Harry did. I think he would admit that too. You know, I think he likes, he feels more comfortable in the kind of collaborative setting, whereas actually I'm kind of just like, I sometimes just, not always, I love working with Harry, working with Jack and producers and everyone as well, but sometimes I do just kind of like to just hibernate, you know, just burrow myself down in a room and work on something without anyone watching the clock or looking over your shoulder, and you can just, you know, take your time. And it did mean as well that I personally felt free to just try anything, just try a lot of different things out. I certainly wasn't thinking about it must be White Lies, you know, especially as I was kind of singing on the demos as well, you know, and I sing in a different way to Harry. So it's kind of like, there was a big question mark over a lot of the songs. Like, is this even going to sound right? Like when we record it as a band and when Harry sings on it. And luckily that was the case for almost all of them. And, you know, has resulted in this record. But yeah, it was a weird process. And I remember, I'm going off on a tangent, but I remember we toured with Kings of Leon in America when they released their 4th album, the one that had Sex on Fire on it. We were all really big fans of their third record because of the times. And one evening on that tour, I remember I said to Caleb, I was like, you know, listen, like, by the way, I think it was at the end of the tour, I was like, just wanted to say, like, you know, that because of the times record, like, we were really, really big fans of that, and, you know, we all were just super into that album. And he was kind of like, yeah, well, you know, it's a weird one because we'd had these like massive fights, and I think Caleb had broken his arm in a fight, I think with the drummer or something. And he was like, and I was on morphine. I was told that I wasn't allowed to play guitar, but I was just kind of sat like at home, kind of convalescing, and wrote a bunch of these songs with a broken arm, basically. And he was kind of like, I'm telling you now, we'll never ever make an album like that again. It was just very extreme circumstances, and that's what came out of it. And I kind of feel that probably is true for this one for us. Like, I mean, I personally wouldn't mind doing it like this again, but I feel like it probably won't happen. We certainly hope that next time we come around to writing, you know, there won't be such an intense sort of series of restrictions around, you know, movement and collaboration because of the pandemic. So I can't see it happening in this way again. So we have to just enjoy the results of this very odd time that we've been all living through. And I think it's kind of understandable and natural that the album does sound a little bit kind of just a bit mad at times. Like, there's a lot of different kind of ideas and little musical journeys on it that probably wouldn't have come about if it had been written in the way we've written everything else, which is just kind of, you know, me commuting to Harry's house and sitting down and writing till 5 o'clock and going home. I just don't. In fact, I'm 100% sure that songs like the first track, "Am I Really Gonna Die?" Like, you know, even right up to the end of recording that, I know Harry was very, very unsure about it and was like, "This doesn't feel right, me singing it." And, you know, Jack and I had to be like, "Just go with it. Just it's going to be good. Like, you just got to, you know, let loose a little bit." So it was that everyone was out of their comfort zones, basically. And even though it was quite intense and, it was very intense at times, actually, during the process, I think it's resulted in a really interesting album, much more interesting than if we'd done it the normal way.
working again with long-term collaborator Ed Buller. He returns to produce some tracks on the album. What do you enjoy so much about working with Ed?
The thing about Ed is he's very, very strong-willed and has a very strong opinion, but he cares so much for the music. He cares so much for the band, and he cares so much about songs. There are so many bands or artists that could never work with Ed because they would have too big an ego for it. They would just, Ed will tell you what sucks about your song, like with no issues. He'll tell you that, you've got to rewrite the verse. He'll tell you that it's in the wrong key. He'll tell you that it's too slow. These can be songs that you might have been living with and demoed for months and really happy with. And he'll be like, nope. And look, so I'm not saying he's always right, like, because he's not. Sometimes he's wrong. And he will admit as well, there's been a couple of songs in the past that we've presented to him, and he's been kind of like, I don't really get it, but I think it's good. So just stick with it. And I don't want to get involved in it because I think you guys just, you like it. And I think, I just don't quite get it. But so this time we just wanted to go in with him. And as much as anything, it was a nice kind of neutral ground for Harry and I to meet at Ed's little mini studio in his home and work there as a trio. And Ed, he just gets us. He knows what the kind of key components of White Lies are musically, but he's also always encouraging us to kind of like push the boundaries. And he was very kind of influential there's a song on the record called Blue Drift, which is, I guess, as you said before, it does have kind of a lot of classic White Lies things about it, but it's also super prog, just has this instrumental middle section that just kind of goes wild. Like Ed actually got Harry and I into this band Passport from the 70s, kind of like proggy fusion band. And we definitely referenced a bit of their music in the middle section to that. So I mean, I love working with Ed. I've learned more, musically speaking. I've learned more from Ed than anyone else I've ever known. Like he has this ability to kind of teach you things in a way that doesn't feel like you're being taught anything. Like he never, I don't know, or maybe it's just the friendship I have with him as well is like he'll say something or he'll share some insight about a little tiny thing to do with writing music, and it just sinks straight in, and I'm like, oh wow, that makes so much sense, and I'm going to use that forevermore, like as a tool when I'm writing. And I definitely think that we have become the songwriters that we are because of a lot of the stuff we learned from him. Like I'm always really thrilled that whenever we put new music out, so many of the comments on like YouTube or whatever, wherever we've posted the music, are fans basically saying along the lines of like, I never have any doubts that like when White Lies are going to put out a new song, like it's going to be a really good song. Basically, like that, they just don't put out bad songs. And I mean, that might sound like a kind of like, well, duh, no one wants to put out bad songs, but it can happen. You have to really stay on top of your craft, and you have to have really, really, really high standards. And it's easy for standards to slip, I think, as you go on. And just as you said before, we were looking back on the last record, on 5, and the tour that we did around it, and we were like, man, there were some really good songs on there. We had Tokyo, which was like our biggest pop song ever. Time to Give, which was our most kind of ambitious sort of, proggy thing that we'd done. Fire and Wings, which is like the heaviest song we'd ever done. And then
that is an amazing way to end that album.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like,
it's a brilliant track.
Yeah, we played it a few times in the encore on the live show, and it always like, there's always like, I've been a kind of heavy metal fan since I was a kid, and I find like we stick to the shadows like heavy metal fans usually, and it was always funny at gigs, like we'd start playing that one and you just see these little few dots of people kind of around going like, yes, like it's my time now, this is my heavy kind of mosh moment. So that was always great. But yeah, so we, even when I was working alone, I'm sure when Harry was working alone, definitely was in the back of my mind like, damn, there were some good songs on that last record, like really going to have to, up the ante here.
One thing I will say, actually, you were going back about talking about Ed. I did watch a documentary about Suede, and he did say that Beautiful Ones wouldn't be a single. So
yeah,
what does he know?
yeah.
He says that's not a single.
I think, Ed's told us a lot of things about. I think those Suede times were like, there were so many big opinions from Ed and within the band, and I think there was another big contentious single. I think it was maybe like that. I think it's my favorite Suede song, that one, The Wild Ones. Yeah. I love that song, and I'm pretty sure it was that one that Ed said, the label were like, that has to be a single, and I think it was that one anyway. And two of the band members, including Brett, were just like, nope, you're not putting it out, kind of thing. And I don't know. We've been lucky to not have too much of that kind of thing. Like, we did have to slightly. There was a bit of a decision between what the second track we'd put out from this new album would be, and we fought for I Don't Want to Go to Mars being that. We felt like it was the right choice because that other track I was talking about, Blue Drift, was in contention too, but the labels, as they always do, wanted to do like radio edits and stuff, and they tried like cutting that song up into 3 minutes, and it just doesn't work. It's like, it's a long song and it doesn't work cut up. So we were kind of like, either put it out at the full length, or we have this song, I Don't Want to Go to Mars, which is like, well, basically perfect little 3.5 minute kind of song ready to go. And it's been received really, really well. I knew it would be, especially by kind of the fans that have been with us since the very beginning.
Yeah, Harry sings it, I Don't Want to Go to Mars. What kind of brainwashed idiot does? When you're writing that, does the thought of technology moving so fast frighten you? I mean, do you suffer from future shock?
Yeah, I think I do. I definitely think I do. Or maybe as a kind of counter to that, it's not so much a fear of future technology. It's a fear of losing touch with older, more kind of purer things. Like, it's, of course, we're sat here talking to each other on Zoom as needs must. And I told you that back in the day, we would do so many of our interviews person to person. We would fly out to Germany, to Ireland, anywhere, and we'd just sit and do a day of interviews in a hotel lobby or whatever. And you can't argue that you get more from that. Everyone gets more from a real life conversation. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the things that keep getting developed and coming out that are supposedly there to make our lives easier, maybe aren't doing that. Like, I listened to this podcast, and one of the things is about like about choices. One of the most interesting things in the way that we absorb everything really now, food, media, music, video, is we have so much choice, and we've been convinced that is something that we want, and that's something that makes us happy or content and is really good. But actually, they've done all these studies, and what happens is when you've got like Netflix or whatever with hundreds and hundreds of things to watch, people end up just watching something that they've seen before 100 times. People just go, I'm just going to start Friends again from the start, or I'm just going to do The Sopranos from the start again, because actually people don't want choice. And like, you all know that, everyone knows that feeling of like, especially you go into like, like a Chinese restaurant or like a Thai restaurant especially, and often they notoriously have like these 30-page menus, and it's like, I don't know, man, like I just want like something nice, like I and I think that kind of thing, I think it is detrimental, and I don't think it makes us happier. And I think that I remember the most enjoyable experiences I've had with TV and with film, I reckon, were as a kid, where you had to be there at the right time to sit down and put the right one of 5 channels on and watch the thing you wanted to watch. And it felt like an event. It felt kind of like a privilege to be there and to be able to watch it. And I also remember, like, with the radio and stuff, I would like if there was a certain song I really liked that was kind of in the charts at the moment, I would sit listening to the radio for a couple of hours, hoping that at some point that one song would come on the radio, you know. Whereas now, even when you get in, I don't drive, but when you get in someone else's car, the drivers are often, they're either like switching between digital radio stations constantly until they find something that they like and then switching again, or they're just putting, you know, Spotify on through the car and like, I don't know, like shuffling through playlists or whatever. But I think that everyone's different, but you know, it's been proven so many times that the things that make us as humans most content and peaceful and happy are basically person to person interactions, spending time with loved ones, with people we care about, experiencing things, new things with those people as well. And I can't help but feel that a lot of the technology that's, you know, that keeps progressing is actually there to stop us doing that stuff as much. And I also kind of think that, like, you know, it's like, I always say this, but like, we keep getting all this new technology to do all these just weird little things, but like, why are airplanes still so shit? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, why, like how much like faster and comfier have airplanes really got in the last like 30 years when you compare that to, for example, how much better of like mobile phones, you know, got, or I should say phones got in 30 years. And it's so out of proportion. Like if you'd said back then to someone kind of like using a home phone to call someone else, oh, in 30 years time, you know, you're going to have these little portable devices and you're going to be able to like call people and watch movies and order food and order whatever off of them. You'd be like, cool. And by the same token, surely by that point, I'll be able to get on an airplane. It will go at the speed of sound and I can fly. I'll be able to like, you know, comfy. I'll be able to fly to Australia in like 6 hours or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I know there are limits to physics, but at the same time, every time I get on a plane, I think this feels no different to getting on a plane in 1999. Like, I swear, like nothing's changed.
The first track released from the album was As I Try Not to Fall Apart. And the lyric goes, why every morning waking up must I try not to fall? Must I try not to fall apart? I mean, the subject matter, it's very current. There are more men opening up about their mental health than ever, you know, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But it's cleverly disguised, as most White Lies songs are, as a pop song.
Yeah, it's something that affects me, affects many of my male friends as well. And it's something that is, you know, to be candid, it's around pretty much every day, and much more so in the last 18 months for sure. I think that's related to the pandemic, of course. It's related to a bit of a lack of purpose. You know, obviously we haven't been on tour or anything like that in forever, and after 13 years of touring almost constantly, it really takes its toll. Suddenly not having that sense of kind of, you know, doing your job basically. I always remember there's this great interview you can find on YouTube with Paul Simon. I think he was releasing just like a book of lyrics, and he gives this big long interview at at one of those Barnes and Noble bookshops in America. He says a bunch of things, but one thing he says is like, in music there are a lot of different cliches. There are musical cliches, and you know, those can be things like, I don't know, for example, the "We Will Rock You" drum beat. You know, that is the musical cliche, and it can be used again and again. It's a great drum beat, but it is a cliche. That's just one example. You know, it goes through all kinds of every instrument. There's different cliches. And he said that if you write a song, you know, using cliches, you can still write a good song, and it can be successful, and it can, you know, it can do well. But when you marry cliche with something important, something that really means something to you, that's when the best songs are written. That's when, because you have this combination of something that is familiar and instant and appealing, but also that just has a weight to it. And on the opposite side, when you just try and write a song that is just nothing but serious, that's not to say it can't be good, but it's not as easy to move people like that, I think. And that's why, you know, hey, I'm like a really big Scott Walker fan, and I like all of Scott Walker's music, but no doubt about it, the latter music that he made in his life is difficult to get into, because it uses no cliches whatsoever. Whereas if you go back to the kind of, you know, the Walker Brothers hits, and like, isn't it, I think the sun ain't gonna shine anymore, I think the first lyric is like, loneliness is a cloak you wear, or something like that, you know. And that's it's moving, like, but it's a pop song. It's like it's a really sunny pop song. So with As I Try Not to Fall Apart, it's all, I think personally, when I'm writing, like, the poppier the music feels, or the more like upbeat the music feels, the more I feel inclined to like counter that with something more emotive and serious in the lyrics. And I guess I remember writing, that is one of the songs on this album that I wrote very, very quickly. And I always get annoyed about songs that I write quickly, because you just wish it could always be that way. And it's like, why did it take me like 3 days to write this other one? And it was very, very late at night. And I wasn't sat down even really with the intention of like working. I was just kind of sat down at my keyboard and at the computer, just thinking, I just play a bit of music, like whatever, you know. And it just came together so quickly. And it also came together in exactly the order that you hear it as the song. Like, the first thing I did was program that little kind of continuous arpeggiating synth, and then thought, that's kind of a nice texture. I want to have a good bass line. That's what I want, like really good synth bass line. Immediately played that bass line. Oh, that's good too. What drum beat goes with that? And I'm pretty sure I just nicked the Dizzy Rascal Fix Up Look Sharp kind of drum beat. Basically, it was very similar. And then it was like, oh, that's good too. And it basically just wrote itself. Like, I can almost, you know, I always feel like I'm not even going to take credit for it. The whole song just wrote itself from start to finish. And I'm pretty sure I worked for about an hour, and then went to bed. And then the next day, just tinkered with it for another half an hour, and then sent the demo off to everyone and was like, hey, here's something, you know. And you always feel pretty good about songs like that, because even though it's annoying that they seemingly happen so easily, you're kind of like, well, that's a song that's been written out of nothing but pure gut instinct and intuition and emotion. So it's going to have that running through it. Like, there's almost no intellectual side to the writing of that. Like, okay, you know, you're going with everything that you've learned, but it's not like I was ever sat down thinking, oh, I'm playing G major. What, you know, it's just like, you just write it, you know. And I'm glad that that's the one. It seemed to connect very quickly with you know, with the other band members, and with everyone kind of working on the record. And it wasn't a surprise to me that they chose that one to kind of put as the first single, as kind of a strong foot forward.
It's very similar with the album opener, Am I Really Going to Die?
Yeah.
You know, it starts with a dark lyric, and then it just turns into a real funky track with a bouncing bass line. And it's one of your poppiest songs. I mean, the album's littered with them, but, you know, I mean, your bass line, you know, tremendous, you know.
It's mad, that one. Yeah. And it was, you know, there were a couple of songs on this record that I was working on, that one especially, where like the whole time I was writing it, I was like, there's no way this is going to end up being a White Lies song. Like, it's just, this is mad, you know. And usually I would send it out to the guys, and there were a couple, and I think that one particularly where our manager Nathan came back and was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, that's definitely going to go on the record. I was like, really? You think, you know, it's not too crazy? But yeah, you're completely right. You know, that's, so actually, that song, which is the first on the album, is like part one of a story, which is kind of completed with the last song on the album called There Is No Cure for It. They're like two parts of the same story. And yeah, this first track, it's this kind of like slightly station to station Bowie era kind of white funk, which tells the story about this kind of sort of hotshot kind of businessman or something like that, who gets a terminal diagnosis, and he just can't accept it. But he can't accept it in a very arrogant way. It's like, you know, he just keeps going to see different doctors, keeps like trying out all these different things, and just being like, this can't be happening to me. There's definitely going to be, I'm not going to die. Like there's going to be something that's going to save me because it's me. And him kind of coming to terms with that and then sort of breaking down a bit more over it, nearer the end. But yeah, like you say, it's this really funky kind of upbeat song. And yeah, I think if the music was like it is, and also the lyrics were like, I don't know, super jolly, it just would be too much. Like it wouldn't work. And it's that thing with, the Paul Simon thing about marrying some cliches, like the kind of funky guitar, the sort of chic kind of style guitar parts, which is a bit of a cliche. But when you marry that with a story about a guy who at the end of the song is calling his daughter or his estranged daughter from a strip club, being like bawling his eyes out down the phone to her, it kind of works basically.
Yeah. No, it does very well. My favorite track on the album is "Breathe." There's a texture in the sound texture in the background. Now you'll have to tell me what it is. It sounds like a flute, and it flows throughout the whole song. Yeah.
I know what you mean. It's sort of like kind of. It's like a synth. It is a synth, but it's kind of like a pan pipe or something like that.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's lovely. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool, that track. We that's one that we wrote with Ed Buller. And when we worked with Ed, we actually one way we work, which is kind of different, is we basically just like stole some like grooves, just some rhythms from other stuff we really liked, and usually just sped it up or slowed it down or whatever. We were like, oh, that's an interesting way to work. Let's start with a kind of an interesting groove. And yeah, the feel of that song "Breathe," which is it's swung. It's very heavily swung, which is not common in pop music, really. There's been some notable hits with that kind of groove, like "Dance Hall Days" by Wang Chung is a big one, and definitely we've borrowed feel from that. But it's like things like it's like "The Way You Make Me Feel," Michael Jackson, which isn't swung, that's 6/8, and also like "Everyone Wants to Rule the World," Tears for Fears, is 6/8. It's quite hard to write pop music in those slightly off-piste tempos or rhythmic feels. So it was a good challenge for us. And I love that song too. It reminds me of maybe a little bit of something off of I think the last Talking Heads record they did. There's a song on there called like "Sax and Violins," which I really like. And it has that kind of meandering. It just doesn't, it doesn't really. It's kind of flat in a way. Like there's not so many like high points and low points as there are in a lot of White Lies songs. But it just pulls you gently through it, and I really like that. It's I think that's going to be a fun one to play live.
I would look forward to seeing that live. And like what I love about White Lies as well is Harry singing. His voice, you can hear every single word he says in every White Lies song. Yeah, I agree. I think Harry has always actually like had a bit of a thing about that. Like I don't know what it is. It's like he just is like, I want to be clear, I want to sing clearly. And I remember as a teenager, he'd always get annoyed when like he felt that singers or bands were like putting on a kind of like gimmicky voice that, if anything, disguised actually the lyrics or what was being sung. It's not to everyone's taste, like, but he does deliver things in quite a sort of kind of like matter of fact sort of style. And Ed always jokes that actually I think Harry's got way better at it over the years and is very much displayed on this record. But back in the start, Harry had this, has always had this amazing voice, but he kind of was always operating it at like level 10. It was like he didn't really do super kind of subtle, gentle moments. It was like, here I am, verse. It doesn't matter if it's a verse, a chorus, or a middle section, I'm belting it. And he's really, I think, over the years, figured out how to use his voice in a more dynamic way. And totally with the song you just mentioned with "Breathe," the verses are really hushed and kind of almost a bit like, a bit Brian Ferry kind of sultry. And it's just not something that we would have been able to do 10 years ago. It's taken the confidence and the experience to get to a point where, just as I feel more comfortable writing
slightly madder pieces of music to submit to the band. Harry feels more comfortable singing in ways that he perhaps wouldn't have, a few years ago.
Well, on big TV, there was the song Change, which, in my opinion, and I'm not just saying this because you're talking to me, it's one of the best songs about, lost love ever.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's really funny you mention that, because I listened to it yesterday. It's really weird. I listened to the whole album for the first time in forever. And this is going to sound very arrogant, but I've always thought to myself, like, if the right pop star or probably female singer got hold of that song Change and did, if Adele did a version of Change, because I think melodically, lyrically, the chords, it really does work well, but it's just, it's a deep cut. It's an album track from our third record, which I don't even think made the top 10. So it's going to take someone to discover it basically at some point and go, hang on a second, like, I want to do a cover of that song and release it. But, I can hear that. I can hear a rendition of that song, like, being on X Factor, because I think...
I was going to say that. I just couldn't understand, how, well, it was never released as a single, but did you say, how has no one discovered that song? Because you just listen to the words, and I think Harry, I've seen him do it live.
Yeah.
As well. It's a phenomenal song.
Yeah, I remember actually when our A&R guy at the time, Jim from Fiction, he came over to Belgium and we played him that actually in the studio, because I think it was it was one that we actually wrote in the studio, kind of on the fly. And I remember Jim being like listening through to it, and he's I guess like myself, a big bearded man, and he was kind of like, oh man, like, that really hits you in the feels, basically. So do you know what? I'm confident that it's going to happen. Like, there'll be a time where, I don't know, like, maybe I'll end up doing some writing with a female singer, and I'll be able to say, like, hey, listen, I'd just love it if would you just consider maybe just trying a version of this, and like, it'll happen. But I do think it's one of those songs that is kind of, it's not going to go as a bare bones skeletal song, melody, lyrics, and chords. It's not going to go out of fashion. It's always going to be relevant to people, and I think it will pop its head out and it'll get discovered. Yeah.
You head out on tour in March 2022. So how excited are the guys and yourself to get out in front of a live audience again?
I mean, super excited. Obviously, a little bit still just kind of nervous. Like, it's not happening till it's happening, kind of thing. But we're confident that by springtime, we should be in the whole world should be in a much better place. Yeah, honestly, it's like I said to you before, I think even just from my own kind of mental health, it's been very apparent how important that side of my work is to me. And the thing is you can, it's like, I think people imagine that, oh, it must be so great, like writing and recording music, that must be like so fulfilling. And it is at times, but not in like the way a job is. No matter what you do, like, even if you're, whatever job people have, I think they would all admit that even if they've had a really shitty day at work, when you leave, you do at least have a little thing in your brain that kind of goes, well done, the day is done. You've done your thing, kind of thing. Like, and when you write a song, it's like talking about As I Try Not to Fall Apart, writing that at 1 a.m, going to bed, like, there's no one around to like pat me on the back and say, good job. No one pays me for my time. Like, it's I'm not saying it's thankless, but it's like, it's speculative work. And whereas when you're on tour, you walk off stage each evening and you're pretty confident that you've made a ton of people happy, or at least they've had a really entertaining time. And you're also aware that that's how you're earning your living. Like, you're earning your keep by doing that. We haven't had it for 2 years, and it's for me, especially, I think, or I'm not saying especially, but it is hit me really hard. Mm-hmm. So I can't wait to just be feeling that again, playing for people, like, because that's when you get the sense of like where your music is, like where it's landed, what it's meant to people. it's all very well getting like nice comments on social media, but it's not until you see people singing songs back at you that you're like, oh wow, this actually does mean something to someone, and this has entertained them, or this is kind of like it's moved someone in some way.
What songs from the new album can you not wait to play live in front of an audience?
There's a track on the new record called Roll December, which I think is going to
be about 6 minutes long, isn't it?
Yeah. It's
a fantastic track.
It's kind of two songs jammed into one. And like the first half is this kind of very stompy sort of Led Zeppelin kind of groove, which I think it'll just be good live. I can just feel it. It's the right kind of tempo. And then the end section of the song is like really fast, sort of songs from the Deaf, Queens of the Stone Age era, kind of like, punk, kind of punky, not really punky, but that kind of tempo. And it's just proper like circle pit, mosh pit territory. So I feel like that one, even though it might not necessarily be like, I'm not saying it's like everyone's going to be everyone's favorite song from the record, but I think live it's just going to translate really, really well. Yeah. And aside from that, I don't know. It's always like a really big surprise with playing new songs. Like what's gonna work. Because sometimes, unfortunately, the songs that you really like as recordings and you're really pumped about playing them, you start playing them live, and for whatever reason, they just don't work. Like there's a song on 5 called Finish Line, which is one of my favorite White Lies songs ever. I absolutely love that song. And we tried so hard like to play it live, and we did play it live a bunch, and just something about it, like maybe it's the wrong tempo, the wrong feel, just never kind of worked. And it's unfortunate, but it happens. So your best bet is basically to learn the whole album, try it all out, and just then you keep the ones that seem to just work. But I think I Don't Want to Go to Mars is going to be massive as well. Like that's probably the song closest to like a Bigger Than Us moment that we've written since that. So I feel like that already has, I love the idea of maybe even opening the set with it. I think would be a kind of pretty cool opener, but if not, it'll go in the encore. I'm pretty sure it's that kind of pretty dramatic. Yeah.
The band have been around for over 20 years now. So looking back, what's been your highlights?
There's been so many. The fact that I think there's always been these moments where you find yourself in a place and it's kind of like you are aware that the only reason you're there is because of the music, because of what you do as a craft. And whether that's been in like Mexico City multiple times, we've been to like the Niagara Falls. We had like an hour to spare at one point years ago, and it was like, hey, we're driving between New York and Toronto. Like we could stop at the Niagara Falls. Or even actually, I was talking to someone the other day. We played a festival in Beijing years ago, and we had a day off, so we went to see the Great Wall of China. It's like, I'm not saying that it's only the recreation that's the highlights. Of course, the shows themselves are too, but it's probably those moments where you're like, I'm on the Great Wall of China. The only reason I'm here is because like I'm here to play a gig of music that I've written with my friends. Like that's just it's crazy. I mentioned Mexico, and like Mexico, lots of bands talk about Mexico, but there is something special there, and it's very often that perhaps it's the distance to the very different obvious culture that that's right in front of your face, from everything from the smells, the taste, the food, the people. It's just a beautiful country. And whenever we play there, last time we were there on the 5 tour, we did 2 sold out nights at a venue called the Plaza Condesa, which is kind of an really old school theater. And just amazing shows, just most wonderful fans. But that could be said about a ton of different countries. But I guess it's the ones that feel furthest from home that you're like, is the most kind of stark realization of where your music has taken you. But hey, we have like continually have amazing gigs in the Netherlands and Denmark and Germany. And I'd love to get back to Asia, love to get back to Australia, New Zealand. We haven't been there in a long time. So that's the other thing is, there's always ambition. Yeah. And I think our ambitions as a band, like we don't really care about like how big we are or anything like that. It's like, we basically would love to just keep writing really good songs, keep writing really good music, and being able to travel as far as we can with them. It's an amazing privilege. And we're very happy with the way things are right now. So if we can just basically keep on like this for another few years or however long, we'll be really satisfied and feel very, very lucky. and hey, if like we said before, if one of our songs, whether it's a new one or it's changed, blows up and we have a big hit single or something, that would be great too. But we've done without it for so many years, and we have a wonderful career playing for people all over the world without ever basically having any like top 40 singles or anything. So yeah, wouldn't change anything really.
I like to ask guests the following questions. Out of all the music in your collection, which artist or band do you have the most albums by?
Oh, that is a great question. I think it's probably a tie between Nick Cave and Talking Heads. I think I've probably got like most of what both of those artists have released. But they're not necessarily my favorite acts. I just happen to have, the back catalogue.
Mm-hmm. Which song or album is your guilty pleasure?
Oh, I've got tons of guilt. I'm constantly getting like guilty. I have guilty pleasure songs. Guilty pleasure song would probably be something like, I think it's just called Into You. I mean, actually, Ariana Grande has released a bunch of bangers in the recent years, but she has one called Into You, and I also love No More Tears Left to Cry. Those are both very guilty pleasures, yeah.
Really appreciated talking to you, Charles, tonight. Thanks very much for taking the time. I really do love the album. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I can't wait for everyone to hear it. All right, cheers, dude. Have a good evening.
Thank you for taking the time, Charles. Take it easy.
Take it easy. Bye.